Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Beacon Effects Deep Dive. We're really excited to tell you more about Plaid's anti-fraud network and to get into some of its new capabilities. I'm Niki Taylor. I run go-to-market for Beacon, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ryan Surveski, who runs product for Beacon. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. We will have a Q&A at the end of the session, so please feel free to drop any questions into the chat as we go along, and we'll be sure to address it at the end. Also, this session will be recorded and shared for your reference. So let's talk about how you can reduce fraud with Beacon. So first, we'd actually like to start with a little trivia about fraud trends. So put on your thinking caps and write your guess into the chat. And the first question is, how much has account takeover and stolen identity fraud increased between 2019 and 2022? Is it A, 31%, B, 67%, or C, 81%? So put your guess into the chat, A, B, or C. How much has account takeover and stolen identity fraud increased? I'll give it a few seconds. All right, great. So C is the answer. There's been an 81% increase in account takeovers and stolen identity fraud during those years. And especially with the rise of technology like artificial intelligence, it's really getting easier for fraudsters to escape the standard fraud checks, which is contributing to this rise. All right, so next question. How much has repeat fraud increased between 2021 and 2022? A, 23%, B, 31%, C, 46%. Type your guess into the chat, A, B, or C. I'll give it a few seconds. Okay. So this is C again. There's been a 46% increase in repeat fraud. What's happening here is a lot of fraudsters are doing this as a living. And when they succeed at defrauding one company, they're obviously going to try that same tactic at another company and another company. And this creates a chain reaction throughout the financial ecosystem and causes this repeat fraud. And without really knowing the footprint of those fraudsters across the ecosystem, it's pretty difficult to stay on top of their newest tactics and stop them before they get to you. It's kind of like playing an ongoing game of chess with fraudsters that just never ends, just one pawn after another. All right, we have one more question for you guys. How much does the average US fintech company lose to fraud every year? A, 30 million, B, 51 million, or C, 76 million? Type your answer into the chat. All right. This one is B, 51 million, and many lose even more. And this obviously creates a significant impact to companies' bottom lines and even hinders the growth of their products and services as well. And I'm sure everybody in this room has their own story on how fraud has impacted your business. All right. So good job on the quiz. To summarize, we've seen that fraud is rising, it's repeating itself across the ecosystem, and it's causing massive financial losses. And what we're really missing today is a network approach to catch that repeat fraud and stop it in its tracks before it proliferates. And so to do that, we need insights into a fraudster's activity across the ecosystem in order to stay ahead of their next move. And what we need is a solution that shares when fraud is seen by one company so that other companies can stop those fraudsters before they act again. We also really need to be able to visualize how users are connected in order to more easily identify fraudulent patterns. And then finally, we need a solution that taps into one of the largest networks of bank account connections in the US and gives you insights into the footprint of a fraudster across the ecosystem. Oftentimes, fraudsters can evade the standard user risk checks, but suspicious bank account activity can be harder for fraudsters to hide, and so it can really help complete your assessment of fraud. And at Plaid, we have all the ingredients to make this solution. Last year, we launched Beacon, our anti-fraud network, that detects fraud via a network of fraud reports from Beacon customers and identifies duplicate users within your own existing user base so that you can stop fraud from proliferating. And being one of the first fraud networks established, we really took the time to listen to our customers and understood that there's actually a huge opportunity to close the gap in fraud detection by evaluating not only the user, but also the connected bank account. And so now we are adding the capability for you to see the fraudulent activity of a bank account that's been linked to you via Plaid. And all of this is done at the time of bank account linking, which means that ultimately it saves you from doing business with a fraudulent account before they even have the chance to transact. Unlike other fraud networks, Beacon is really the only solution that taps into the scale of Plaid's over 500 million connected bank accounts to give you the most granular fraud insights on your Plaid linked accounts. And this, we believe, is the missing chess piece that will help you skip straight to checkmate with the fraudster and stop that never-ending game of chess that you're playing. And so with Beacon's bank account insights, you can receive attributes for your linked bank accounts that may correlate to a higher risk of fraud. These attributes are across categories like account age and status, the number of Plaid apps it's connected to, frequency of those connections, related IP addresses, and even identity changes on the bank account. And again, all of these can be really good indicators of potential fraudulent activity on the account. So I'll pass this over to Ryan to give us an understanding of how it all works together.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Niki. So how does Beacon work, and why are we so excited about the new Bank Accounts Insights feature? Let's walk through the Beacon dashboard so you can see how to leverage the power of Plaid's network for your business. As you can see here, you're onboarding Layla Lee Johnson. When she goes through your KYC process, you'll pass her identity information to Beacon, which will scan across Plaid's network of fraud reports from other members to determine whether or not she's been reported as fraudulent elsewhere. It will also scan across your own user base to see if she's a duplicate or has had a previous record of first-party fraud with you. In your dashboard, you can see that she's been flagged for your review. It looks like some aspects of her application have been identified as both a duplicate within your database and as a potential fraudster from another company. You'll see that Beacon never shares personally identifiable information with customers and only shares that a report has been made by another Beacon member that matches your user. You can see the specifics of the fraud report to the right. In this case, her full name and her SSN matches a stolen identity that was reported to the Beacon network from a company in the lending industry. That's a big red flag. So you decide to take a little bit closer look into how she's connected with your other users. You use the Visual Explorer in the dashboard to see that Layla has the same SSN as 4 other users, who are each connected to different users on different fields of personal information. This could be good evidence that Layla, if that is her real name, is involved in some sort of larger fraud scheme. You could choose to block her at this point, but after further investigation, you are not yet sure if she's a fraudulent user, and you want to gather a little bit more information before potentially blocking a good user. So, Layla continues with your onboarding process and successfully links a bank account to you via Plaid. In the dashboard, you will soon be able to see the fraud attributes associated with that linked bank account. Beacon returns over 40 attributes from the linked bank account that may indicate fraudulent activity. And these insights are ones that only Plaid can provide, like how many other Plaid apps the linked account is connected to, the velocity of those connections, and other attributes on account usage and history. It looks like this bank account has been linked to Plaid apps with 10 different IP addresses over the last 3 days. Now, this alone may or may not be suspicious, but combined with the other information you had previously collected about Layla, you now decide that this is too high of a risk and you block this user on your platform. So you can see how it's essential to have these account insights before doing business with a user. Now I'll hand it back over to Niki.
Thanks, Ryan. So, you've seen why the financial ecosystem is in need of a solution like Beacon, and you've seen Beacon in action and why it's unique to other fraud networks. With Plaid's network of connected bank accounts, we can provide the missing chess piece of your risk program, which is evaluating a linked bank account for fraudulent activity. And because Plaid is one of the largest and most trusted networks in digital finance, we are able to give you rich insights about the linked bank account. For example, early analysis for a neobank customer found that bank accounts with more than 3 different browsers linking the account to other Plaid apps in the past week have a 65 times higher risk of fraud. So, leveraging these account attributes in your fraud program to create fraud rules like this one could really help prevent major fraud losses. Additionally, our customers have scanned millions of their users against the Beacon network to determine potential fraudulent activity. On average, 1 in 1,000 users have been flagged as fraudulent within Beacon. These reports have already been helping customers improve their fraud programs. But most importantly, we're really excited to give you this new capability of bank account insights that will augment your fraud risk programs. Great. So, we all know how powerful it can be when a group of people come together and fight for the same purpose. There's a proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So think about just how far we can go together as a network to fight fraud. If we work together to solve this problem, we could change the trajectory of fraud trends and instead live in a world where fraud is much less prevalent. And just to demonstrate this, if everyone can give a thumbs up right now on the screen, we can see just what we alone in this room can do. So give a thumbs up if you agree and want a network approach to fighting fraud. Great. Good to see people agreeing. Great. So as you can see, now is the time to invest in a network approach to fraud, and we can't wait to continue the conversation with you. If you're interested in hearing more, please feel free to reach out to your account manager. And we do have some time for questions, so I'll pass it over to Ryan to get us going with them.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, looks like we have a few good questions here. So the first one, I'll pass it back to you, Nikki. It is, how is Beacon different from other consortiums?
Yeah, good question. So Beacon has a lot of different features that aren't included in other consortiums out there. First, we do have the ability to detect duplicate users within your own user base. And we also have a visual graph explorer that helps you visualize how your users are connected and makes it really easy for you to kind of suss out any fraudulent patterns that might be there. Also, that you can make better fraud decisions. Beacon also has the ability to monitor the quality of fraud reports that are submitted, so you know that you're getting the highest quality hit rates. And then most importantly, we spent obviously a lot of time talking about this today, but we've augmented Beacon by adding insights on your Plaid linked bank accounts, which we think is key in understanding the footprint of that fraudulent account and kind of closing that gap in fraud detection programs. And again, because we're looking at your Plaid link bank accounts activity kind of across the vastness of the Plaid network, this is something that only we can do as Plaid and only we can provide in the marketplace.
Cool. Looks like the next question is, who owns the fraud reports? This is a good one. Pretty quick answer, but the answer is basically you as a member of Beacon own those fraud reports and all of the data that you submit. So as you're scanning users against the network, as you're marking those users as fraudulent, at any point in time, you can change that or delete those reports. So let's say you tag somebody as fraudulent, but later get more information and want to revise that. It's totally up to you.
Great. I'll read and take the next question, I think. So the question is, are we required to report fraud to the network? So, yes, in order to grow the network of fraud reports as quickly as possible, we do require Beacon customers to report fraud that they see to the network. It is a give to get solution, and we're really focused on building the largest network of fraud reports possible.
Cool. Thanks, Niki. The next question is, what is the integration like for Beacon? This is another good one. So as you saw in the demo just a few minutes ago, all of that is possible via dashboard. And if that's how you want to use Beacon, you can get all the functionality of Beacon through the dashboard. However, you can also do all of that in the API or some combination of that. What we see most of our customers doing is they'll typically integrate with the API after a KYC or identity verification step, and then potentially call it again after a bank account linking step to get more signal on those account risk insights. And then finally, the last part is a lot of customers integrate with webhooks to make sure that if there is an update to the network, let's say you onboarded a user today, they weren't fraudulent, but maybe somebody tags them as fraudulent a week, a month, a year from now. You want to be notified about that, and you can do that with the Beacon webhooks.
Okay. I'll read this next question and I'll pass it to Ryan to answer. So it says, how can we leverage all of the tools available for fraud detection and monitoring for my existing customers who have yet to link an account? So for example, is it possible to scan customers for risk scores or AML purposes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is not specifically a AML tool, although we do have other products like Plaid Monitor that might be interesting to you if that's what you're looking for. I think maybe taking a step back a little bit, like how we think about Beacon in terms of your suite of fraud tools is, really you're trying to prevent fraud across the journey of the user, right? So they're going to onboard during that KYC step, they're going to link a bank account, they're going to make a transaction, and you may use a bunch of different tools across that journey. This is where like Plaid really has solutions across the board for you. So IDV and monitor at the front of the journey, signal at the time of transaction, and then Beacon, where we see fitting in, is a lot of that in between. So once the user is onboarded, how can you tell on an ongoing basis if this is somebody potentially risky, somebody that we need to, look further into their account?
Great. We have another question here that kind of gets into how this plays with some of our other products, Ryan, but it says, if we were using Beacon when accounts are linked, would you still recommend using Signal if when a transfer was initiated using that linked account?
Yeah, so good question. And this, expands on the previous answer a little bit, so very timely. I think the short answer is like, it's going to depend on your use case. In general, we do see customers that use both and find them useful for separate reasons. The account risk insights can be useful at the time of linking, which gives you a lot of information of like, what should you do with that account? Should you potentially block the account at that point in time before even letting them transact? Or maybe you want to do a manual review or step up at that point. Once it gets to the point of transaction, that's where we have even more information about what the user is intending to do, right? How much money they're trying to transact, what time of day they're trying to transact, all this other information. And that's where Signal can provide even more information about, the next steps that you want to take of whether to block that transaction or not. So I think the summary is, yes, they can be used together. We think they work really well together.
Great. Okay. And then maybe one more question. What recourse do users have in the event of an incorrectly identified instance of fraud? Or in other words, how do we monitor the fraud reports, Ryan?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot. So we know that for a product like this, data quality is absolutely essential, right? And making sure that we don't block somebody from having access to financial services is something that we took into account from day one of designing this product. With that in mind, we have a lot of ways to measure quality of reports coming into the network. So, for example, if somebody is reported as fraudulent by one customer, but 5 other members of the network all disagree with that, and that's something that they're able to do in the dashboard of Beacon, then we will remove that fraud report. Even further than that, if we see that's a pattern across one of the members of the network, we will remove all of their fraud reports or talk to them about how we can improve data quality to make sure we're not excluding anybody here. That's kind of like the main tool we have. We also generally recommend that customers here do not block just based on one other fraud report in the network, that they take some additional action. So, for example, you may get a fraud report that says, I'll use Niki as an example. Niki is potentially synthetic identity fraud. Well, you may then want to step that user up to do a selfie and document check if you haven't done that already, or do a manual review of those steps if you haven't done that, to make sure that you can verify that the report from the network is correct. Really using like both of these approaches together, we found that this in general can be a good thing for both fintech members of Beacon as well as end users.
Great. And then there's another question here, kind of along those lines, but it says, how does Plaid tap into the consortium data without each player's privacy consent? Maybe you can explain a bit more about how it works, Ryan.
Yeah, so there's no, so kind of two parts of this question, maybe a little bit in the details here, but on the fraud consortium side, yeah, there is no consent on the Plaid side. It would only be on the customer side on your app here. And we're specifically just using it for fraud purposes and able to do that. On the account risk side, a lot of the new bank account risk features we were talking about today, that does have a consent pane when the user is linking their account via Plaid. So it's very similar to the consent pane that you would see today in your app, but just includes a mention of this as well.
Okay. I'll answer a question that we see. How many partners are you working with for Beacon? So I'm interpreting this as maybe how many customers are using Beacon, but essentially we have tens of thousands of fraud reports that have been submitted to Beacon, and millions of consumers have been scanned against Beacon, and the network has been growing 20% month over month, and a lot of the largest fintechs are either using the product or in close conversations to use the product in the near future. And I think the good news is that while our network of fraud reports scales, customers can really take advantage of Plaid's already scaled network of account connections to receive bank account insights on their Plaid linked bank accounts. So that's something that we think we added to the product to give you pretty immediate value as we continue to see the fraud network scale.
Cool. There's another question here that I can take. Does this help capture payment fraud at all? I think this is pretty similar to the question that got asked earlier about using Signal and Beacon together. I think the short answer to this is no, this does not directly capture payment fraud. This is more on like the user or the account level. However, obviously, if there's a fraudulent user, they may be likely to commit payment fraud. But if you're specifically asking about how to target payment fraud, that's where the Signal product used in addition to Beacon may be the right answer.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you guys for coming to our Beacon Talk. We really appreciate all the questions. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you directly. And again, please reach out to your account manager for more information. Thank you.